So here's the flashback. Putressa, June 1820. LaRue stabbed his cousin, Rich, through the lung with the stiletto. The sound of escaping air followed. The sigh came from a wound that opened like puckering lips in the flesh under the ribs. LaRue cocked his head, mouth open, and then looked at his friends, Comp and Brim. "Did you hear that?" "He's full of air," said a delighted Comp. "Sounds just like," said LaRue, in awe of the anomaly. The three ruffians laughed in cathartic abandonment. The choral guffaw set the neighborhood dogs to barking. "Dang if it didn't sound just like the new street lamps," said Comp. LaRue and Brim suddenly ended their revelry and began beating camp with fists and feet for stating the obvious. In an unintentional way, Rich told one more joke before he died. The punchline was delivered not by lips, but a new mouth emitting the sounds of a pierced right lung. Just like old Rich, that tricky bastard. They were all bastards, though, and tricky enough to have survived to adulthood in Swamp Ghetto. They were brothers of the lost ones, of the people who live in the bottom, those who survive the fever and escape the snares of the cherubic reaper. The shadow being of Artemis grew stronger every day, but her dark tower stayed hidden in the black, and her essence is that of the forgotten. Life in disconcerted wombs abandoned LaRue, Comp, and Brim, but despite the neglect they became young men and proceeded to the nearest light, at Shank and Sixth, their designated meeting place. They grew up in a life where necessities had to be taken from someone else, so they learned to organize themselves. Survival demands talented thieves and clever liars. Rats bred in Swamp Ghetto. A place prone to flooding, where shacks stood on stilts made of wood or creek stone. The abode seemed to float when the dirty floodwater rose after a rain or melting of snow. Putressa has a drain, and Swamp Ghetto is the name. During the long wars between Britain and France, the town was organized on a grid pattern for census and tax zoning purposes. Administrators did not intend for people to live in the swampy bottoms, but like any modern urban environment, the destitute exist in lots zoned with the lowest property tax. Shacks are built on those places, and life develops from the slipshod seed. Landlords receive, and tenants grieve. Putressa has a drain, and Swamp Ghetto is the name. Perhaps you, reader, could come up with some of your own rhymes, but you get the point. Life sucks in Swamp Ghetto. Drains have that effect, and Swamp Ghetto is the name. A week earlier. Young bastards and their invalid mothers of Swamp Ghetto found surprise and wonderment when, one night, up the road, where the walkway fell away, a pole with a light shone dimly in the darkness. The youth of Swamp Ghetto carried or cajoled their mothers to ascend the hill to the level of the sidewalk and stand out under the strange light. The first time they saw it up close, they were surprised to find no candle or torch on the tall pole. Instead, it discharged the sound of flowing air when standing near. A metal snake with steady hiss and stationary slither, connecting Swamp Ghetto with the rest of the town. Some of the youth followed the series of lights into Putressa. They traveled down 6th Street along the drainage canal, now dry, to the main street, Methuselah. They counted the lights, but only Lot and Rivulet could count past 20. So they named the lights instead. Little Trilly was the most aggressive, so her names tended to stick. Lighty, Brighty, Shiny, Polly, Hissy, Eyeball, Hungry, Lampy, Sunny, Why Does God Hate Us, Tall man, Sparky, Flamey. The children from Swamp Ghetto stood in amazement at what they witnessed as they neared the town square. It was the dead of night, and Putressa was alive under the strange hissing lights. Parents and their kids roamed the square. A fanfare brass band filled the air. Vendors sold and policemen strolled. Hungry bellies churned upon smelling the roasted meats for sale on wheeled carts. The kids from Swamp Ghetto gasped and pointed when they saw the man on the giant three-wheeled tricycle approach them on the circle drive. The unwashed youth cheered and waved. The man on the bike began to wave back to them, but noticed their lack of curls and abundance of tatter. Uncared-for children. So he cared not for them, and frowned instead. The cyclist shooed the kids with his half-lifted hand and rode away. The kids still too amazed to process the offensive gesture. Rivulet, one of the Swamp Ghetto youth, her malnourished body concealing her true age, noticed something odd about some of the people in the procession. Occasionally, a wagon with a filthy old coffin followed the circle drive, then down the main street and turned into one of the many neighborhoods along the road. "What are they doing with all the dead bodies?" she asked aloud. "Must be the Day of the Dead," said Lot, the eldest and self-proclaimed leader of the group. "What is the Day of the Dead?" asked little Trilly in a panicked voice. "They dig up their family members, the dead ones, and parade them around," said Lot with the confidence of a liar. "Why don't we do that?" asked Joe, Lot's half-brother. "I don't want to do that," said little Trilly. "Jojo asks why we don't do that," said Lot in a mocking voice. "So what?" asked Joe. "Where is your dad buried, Jojo?" "I don't know who my dad—" "Exactly," interrupted Lot. Joe's face turned red. "But we can do it for Mom," Joe retorted. "It costs money to buy a proper stone. That's why we burned baby Juniper, little Tom, and Uncle. That's what we'll do to Ma, too." "I'll bury her myself if I have to," said Joe. "Where are you going to do that?" asked Lot. "In the yard," said Joe. Lot and two of the other boys laughed. Joe looked at them, confused, but clenching his fists and twisting his mouth. "They start to come apart in the water," said Rivulet in a soft voice as she placed her arm around Joe. "You have to burn them." The children of Swamp Ghetto watched the busy night square in rapt silence. The band began to play a fast march. "I don't need to bury her," Joe continued. "I'll carry Mom around with me like that guy there." Joe pointed to a young man pulling a small wagon loaded with a mud-covered coffin. The Swamp Ghetto kids stared at the porter with open mouths. The coffin was partially rotten. The corpse's head stared out from inside the softened pine box at them. The youth collectively stepped back from the horror. Trilly screamed, but Lot held her in place as she attempted to bolt away. She breathed heavily through her choleric and hoarse throat. "This town is sick," said Rivulet as she looked up into the night sky. "Let's go back home." She turned and began to walk away. "Let's go," Lot commanded the group.